This infuriates me. Men are often criticized for trying to opt out of child support, and here we have two fathers whose children have been kidnapped by the legal system through the machinations of their children's mothers and of others. One of the mothers now regrets what she did. Too bad she wasn't thinking at the time. I can't help but think that the reason that these women did what they did was, at least in part, they're wanting to not have any responsibility for the children. If the fathers got custody, the mothers might have to pay child support. Both of these cases involve the state of Utah. It seems that in Utah, fathers have fewer rights. According to the Huffington Post, the state has a reputation as a, quote, a magnet for those seeking to unfairly cut off opportunities for biological fathers to assert their rights to connection with their children, unquote. Utah Supreme Court Chief Justice Christine Durham wrote that back in 2009 in a case where a mother in Wyoming lied and told the father she had miscarried, then put the baby up for adoption in Utah. That was one of about 10 cases around that time in which adoptions went forward in Utah without the out-of-state father's knowledge or consent. As reporter Jerry Marcon described in the Washington Post a few years ago, Utah is culturally conservative, and lawyers say that the powerful Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, with its emphasis on family values, has strongly encouraged adoption-friendly laws. Quote, the Utah statutes can be harsh, but they are looking at what's best for the child, stable placements, and two-parent families, unquote. This was David Hardy, a lawyer for LDS Family Services, a Mormon Church-affiliated adoption agency that is among the nation's largest. Terry Achane is a U.S. Army drill instructor. He and his wife, Tira Bland, were estranged, and she was pregnant. She had threatened to have an abortion. After his deployment to South Carolina from Texas, where they both lived, she cut off all contact with him and made arrangements for the adoption in secret. He didn't know where she was or whether he had a child. The adoption agency attempted to contact him once at an old address that his wife had given him, an address she knew was no good. Now remember, he's in the Army. How difficult would it have been for them to find him? There's no evidence that they tried to contact him via the Army, so they went ahead with the adoption. Several weeks after his child's birth, he found out about it and contacted the adoption agency. They, to put it mildly, were unhelpful. So he took the matter to court. A judge has now ordered the couple to return the child to her father. According to ABC News, quote, in his ruling, Judge Gerald McDade said he was astonished and deeply troubled by the actions of the agency, the adoption center of choice, calling its treatment of Achane utterly indefensible. The adoptive couple, the Freis, according to their lawyer, will not give up the girl and will appeal the judge's ruling. In his ruling, the judge said of the Freis that they knew Achane had never been consulted and, quote, acknowledged this risk but decided they wanted to proceed forward with the adoptive placement anyway, unquote. According to their blog, the couple has raised more than $20,000 to pay for legal fees, describing the arrival of Achane's daughter in their lives, quote, a righteous desire blessed to fruition by God, unquote. I want to know where the website is to help Terry Achane with his legal fees. This is outrageous and amounts to a conspiracy between the birth mother, the adoption agency, and the adoptive parents. They all knew that Achane, the child's father, had not consented to the adoption, yet they decided to go ahead anyway, defying both the law and of common decency, to say nothing of the child's right to know her father, as well as the father's right to know his daughter. Far from being able to appeal, I think this couple should face charges for being involved in this, as should the adoption agency and his estranged wife. They all knew that he had not and would not give consent to the adoption, making this essentially a kidnapping. By the way, they're trying to blame the father by saying he left his estranged wife high and dry. But remember, Achane is in the Army. His wife knew where he was going to be stationed and could have contacted him, even if through the Army. Now, I don't know much about the armed services, but from friends who were in the service, I remember hearing that the armed service does not take kindly to their members not living up to their responsibilities. The Freis on their blog also complained that Achane had never sent the child a present or inquired about her health. This is ridiculous. Given how unresponsive the Freis have been to the father's rights from the beginning, It is likely that Achane is following his attorney's advice and not contacting them, except through his attorney. Here is a different case where the victim, Terry Achane, is being blamed. Hopefully, he will get his child back soon. Hang on a sec. John Wyatt's girlfriend got pregnant. They were both 19 when the baby was born. As soon as he learned that the baby was coming, he rushed to the hospital. He wanted to be there for his daughter's birth, but he was too late. They'd already left. His girlfriend had instructed the hospital not to list her as a patient. And after the child was born, they snuck out a side door. Later, Wyatt found out that his girlfriend had given their child up for adoption in Utah, even though the child was born in Virginia. According to University of California at Berkeley law professor Joan Hollinger, quote, the Utah adoption statutes are especially harsh with respect to biological fathers who wish to assert their rights in an adoption proceeding, unquote. According to the Huffington Post, quote, under Utah law, he had only 20 days to file for custody, a deadline that expired before he was even aware his daughter was in Salt Lake City. In July, Utah's Supreme Court ruled against Wyatt, saying he had failed to exercise his parental rights. This even after Wyatt was awarded custody of Emma by a Virginia court. The Utah Attorney General said, quote, in a situation where the birth mother who carried that child for 9 months and has made a decision that is in the best interest of her child to go to an adoptive family, that we ought to have the same interest in the father. He ought to have to step up and show the same type of commitment for the child to resolve that, unquote. And also, unquote, the Huffington Post article. Right. The father, who didn't even know where his child was, should somehow have magically intuited that his daughter was in Utah, and then should also have immediately known what the Utah statutes were. A state he didn't live in, remember, and file for custody within that measly 20 days. Apparently the fact that he filed visitation and custody petitions 5 days before Thomas and Chandler Zarembinski, the adoptive parents, initiated an adoption proceeding in Utah, and 8 days after baby Emma's birth, well, I guess that doesn't count. Further, here's an interchange between Attorney General Mark Shurtleff and Kate Snow on Dateline from Emma's website. Kate Snow. A Virginia court did find in John Wyatt's favor. Mark Shurtleff. Right. Kate Snow. Why does Utah not recognize that? Mark Shurtleff. Why does Virginia not recognize our law? I mean, that's the problem. That's the debate that you have. Kate Snow. So he's out of luck. Mark Shurtleff. That's right. That's where the adoption occurred, and that's where the child is now, and that's the law that applies. I don't want to say so sad, you know, too bad. That's not my attitude with this father. I heard for the father, but we have to have laws and rules in place so that we have consistency in the application of the laws, and that's what we think is provided here. Unquote. Reason is apparently in short supply in Utah. So is law. According to U.S. law, Virginia would be considered the home state for the child as regards to custody. Interestingly, court records show that the Zarembinskis cared for Emma at a hotel in Virginia before flying her to Utah. So they essentially illegally took her out of Virginia. I would call it kidnapping. John Wyatt is now suing. The Virginia Court of Appeal approved his lawsuit against the adoption agency, ruling that a parent intentionally deprived of parental rights may sue third parties involved in that deprivation. Here's part of an opinion from Virginia Supreme Court opinion re tortuous interference with parental rights. Quote, it is both astonishing and profoundly disturbing that in this case a biological mother and her parents, with the aid of 2 licensed attorneys and an adoption agency, could intentionally act to prevent a biological father, who is in no way alleged to be an unfit parent, from legally establishing his parental rights and gaining custody of a child whom the mother did not want to keep, and that this father would have no recourse in the law, unquote. This was the majority who said. Well, I wish John Wyatt a speedy return of his child. I hope that John Wyatt will prevail in his lawsuit, and that Terry Achane in any lawsuits he might file against the adoption agencies and other parties involved in what is essentially a kidnapping, in order to deny fathers their parental rights. I would like to point out that John Wyatt's former girlfriend, Colleen Folland, now regrets her part in this adoption. It is believed that her parents influenced her to seek adoption. Nevertheless, at 19, she was old enough to make a decision for herself. Now, please see the links below for more information. Included is a link to a 3-page article from City Weekly, a Utah publication, titled City Weekly, some call it kidnapping, how Utah adoption laws take babies from the nation's unmarried fathers. And it includes a case of Ramsey Shoud, a Florida man who had his child taken away by the state of Utah, Wyoming father Cody O'Day, who lost his child even though the birth mother told him the child was deceased, and others, including Wyatt. Plus, it talks about Utah's restrictive conditions for a man who wants custody of his child. It's not just the 20 days. He's apparently got to show he's got money and the resources and all sorts of crap. The mother doesn't, but he does. It also has information on lobbyist Larry Jenkins. Larry Jenkins is a lobbyist for adoption firms, and he bears some responsibility for this entire mess. I'm also leaving a link to Utah State Attorney General Mark Shurtleff. And as soon as I can compose an email without cursing, I'm going to give him a piece of my mind. I suggest you do too, since he seems to be a little short upstairs. Thanks for watching, and screw Utah!